Miles remained completely frozen, his back pressed hard against the wooden slats of his chair, staring up at the tall figure towering over table 7. The blue plastic lighter rested in the center of the man's open palm, catching the warm amber reflection of the overhead track lights. The stranger's hazel eyes were calm, intelligent, and steady, devoid of the slightest trace of hostility. "Mind if I sit?" the man asked, gesturing with a slight nod toward the vacant wooden chair opposite Miles. "You looked like you were about to put your fist through that legal pad, and I could use a place to rest my feet before the rain picks up again." Miles swallowed the dry knot in his throat. His vocal cords took several seconds to coordinate before producing a sound. Sure, yeah, go ahead." The man pulled the chair out with an easy, fluid motion and sat down. Even seated, his broad-shouldered presence seemed to occupy half the small corner booth. He placed the blue lighter gently onto the faux marble tabletop, sliding it across the surface until it rested beside Miles's pencil case. "Julian," the man said, extending a large, bare right hand across the table. "Julian Mercer." Miles blinked, looking at the callous, steady hand before reaching out his own. Miles Miller. "Nice to meet you, Miles," Julian said, his grip firm and brief. He unbuttoned the front of his charcoal trench coat, letting the heavy wool drape over the sides of the chair, and leaned his forearms against the table. "I saw you through the window tearing those sheets off like they owed you money. First drafts can be brutal." A faint, nervous laugh escaped Miles's chest. He looked down at the 3 tight, crumpled balls of yellow paper scattered across the tabletop like small yellow boulders. "Brutal is putting it gently. I had a decent rhythm going for about 20 minutes, and then the entire second act drove straight off a cliff, ran out of road completely." Julian smiled, a genuine, warm expression that creased the corners of his eyes and softened the severe angles of his jaw. "I know the feeling. Different line of work, but the frustration is identical. When a structure refuses to hold together, you want to tear the whole foundation down." "What line of work is that?" Miles asked, his curiosity suddenly breaking through the lingering remnants of his earlier panic. "Architectural salvage and historic restoration," Julian replied, settling back into his chair. "I spend most of my weeks crawling through 19th century basements, old shipping warehouses, and condemned brownstones across the 5 boroughs, trying to rescue original timber, ironwork, and historical records before municipal wrecking crews come in and pave over everything." Miles's eyebrows twitched upward. His theatrical mind, which had spent the last 2 hours casting this man as a high-level espionage courier, suddenly reeled. Historic restoration? "Today was a prime example of the madness," Julian said, letting out a low, weary chuckle as he rubbed the back of his neck. "My restoration partner Claire was over at an old maritime carriage depot near the Red Hook waterfront this morning. We've been trying to secure a preservation permit for the building for 6 months. Out of nowhere, the city sends a structural inspector on a Monday morning who flags a 3-inch discrepancy in the foundation clearance beneath the seaward deck. 3 inches! The building has been standing on those cedar pilings since 1884 without moving an eighth of an inch, but because of some obscure municipal code from 1972, they threatened an immediate stop work citation." Miles sat utterly motionless, his breath catching in his throat as every single fractured piece of the woman's phone call from table 4 snapped into dazzling, ordinary focus. "She was furious," Julian continued, completely unaware of Miles's internal revelation. "She called me while I was on the subway, frantic because the inspector was threatening to lock the site. Years ago, the original harbor merchant hid the original property deeds and hand-drawn municipal dock surveys in an antique iron-strung box beneath the subfloor crawlspace. If the city inspector found that unpermitted access hatch open during his walkthrough, he would have slapped a formal violation on the title and impounded the contents. Claire had to hide the key under a foundation brick, leave the building immediately, and tell our legal team not to sign a single compliance waiver until we could verify the original survey." Miles stared at Julian across the wobbly table, his jaw slightly slack. The mysterious crawl space, the missing key, the 3.5-inch clearance, the panic about the Monday inspection. It was all building codes, property deeds, and city bureaucracy. "So that's why you were outside earlier?" Miles managed to ask, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "Exactly," Julian nodded. "Had to run down to the site, grab the key from under the brick, and pull the survey ledger out before the site was padlocked. Claire left me a note with the storage locker gate code and the transport manifest written on a scrap of receipt paper in blue ink. I just got off the phone with our freight hauler who's running an overnight cargo truck up to our restoration workshop in Massachusetts. He has to clear the northern logistics gate before the private access road gets closed for road work at midnight." Julian shook his head, smiling with dry amusement. A ridiculous amount of running around just to keep a box of 100-year-old paper from ending up in a city incinerator. But when you care about the history of a place, you do what you have to do. A sudden, overwhelming wave of laughter bubbled up inside Miles's chest, so powerful and absurd that he had to press his hand over his mouth to stifle it. The grand, lethal shadow world of smugglers, federal marshals, and stolen ciphers that had sent his heart into cardiac arrest was literally just a pair of passionate preservationists trying to beat a city deadline to save old maps. The absurdity of it was magnificent. The paralyzing paranoia that had gripped him for the last hour evaporated into thin air, leaving him feeling lighter, clearer, and more grounded than he had been in months. Julian looked at him with mild amusement. "I take it your afternoon was equally chaotic?" "You could say that," Miles smiled, leaning forward and resting his elbows comfortably on the table. "My crisis was entirely self-inflicted, though. I'm trying to write a stage thriller about a private investigator named Valerie Vance, set on a stormy coastal wharf in New England." Julian's eyes drifted toward the open legal pad, glancing at the neat handwriting at the top of the page. Valerie Vance, strong name. Sounds like someone who doesn't take excuses from anybody. "That was the idea," Miles said, picking up his drafting pencil and spinning it between his fingers. "In Act 1, she tracks a missing maritime ledger to an old warehouse on the edge of the water. She retrieves the evidence from a hidden floor space, evades a security sweep, and heads toward a freight train idling in the switching yard. But the second I started Act 2, the entire thing fell apart. I tried putting guards in the boxcar, but it felt generic. I tried moving the scene to an underground boiler room, but the dialogue sounded fake. I tried making it about a telegraph code, and it read like nonsense. Every direction I took felt hollow." Julian listened intently, his hazel eyes narrowing in thoughtful concentration. He tapped his index finger against the faux marble table in that familiar 3-beat cadence Miles had noticed earlier. Tap, 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 followed by a short pause. "You want to know why it felt hollow?" Julian asked gently. "Desperately," Miles admitted. Julian reached out, his large finger lightly nudging one of the crumpled yellow paper balls on the table. "You're getting bogged down in the mechanics because you're treating the scene like an obstacle course instead of a real place. Take that freight yard scene, for instance. You said you tried putting armed guards inside the boxcar?" Miles nodded sheepishly. 2 guards with lanterns. "Nobody puts guards inside a cold wooden boxcar on an active rail line," Julian said with a practical grin. "I've spent years around freight depots and rail sidings. An active switching yard in the middle of a coastal storm isn't dangerous because of men with guns. It's dangerous because of the environment. The ground is soaked in black axle grease and slick, wet ballast stone. Steel cables are whipping in 30-mile-per-hour winds. Steam from the locomotive boiler blinds your vision every 10 seconds, and 20-ton iron cars are shunting in the dark without warning. If Valerie is sneaking across that yard, she wouldn't be looking for a firefight. She'd be using the storm culverts, timing her movements to the hiss of the steam release, and hanging onto the iron brake housing under the carriage where the yard searchlights can't reach." Miles's eyes widened as the imagery bloomed instantly in his mind. The cold grease, the blinding steam, the sheer physical weight of the machinery. It had 10 times more atmosphere than 2 generic thugs holding lanterns. "That's incredible," Miles breathed, his pencil twitching in his hand. "That gives the action real grit." "Tactics are easy once you understand how things are built," Julian said, leaning closer, his expression shifting into something deeper and more earnest. "But there's a bigger question you have to answer first, Miles. Why is Valerie doing this?" Miles hesitated. She's hired to find the ledger." Julian tilted his head, his brow furrowing slightly. "That's a job description, not a reason. Why does she care about this ledger? Why is she crawling through freezing seawater under a rotting pier at midnight instead of walking away and telling her client it's impossible?" Miles stared at the blank yellow lines of his notepad, the question echoing through his thoughts. He realized that in all his frantic plotting, he had never once stopped to consider Valerie's emotional stake in the story. What if the ledger contains the only proof that her former partner wasn't a traitor? Miles said slowly, the idea forming piece by piece as he spoke. Her partner disappeared 3 years ago, blamed for an altered shipping manifest that cost dozens of dock workers their pensions. The harbor company swept it under the rug, and the town turned its back on his family. Finding that ledger isn't about collecting a fee for Valerie. It's the only way she can clear his name and forgive herself for not believing him before he vanished. Julian snapped his fingers, a wide, appreciative grin spreading across his face. "There it is. That's the heartbeat of the play. Now, when she steps into that train yard, the audience isn't just watching a detective try to catch a train. They're watching a woman fight for the memory of the only person who ever stood by her. The danger matters because the cost of failing is unbearable. Miles felt a profound electric warmth settle into his chest. The entire architecture of Act 2, which had seemed like an impassable brick wall 20 minutes ago, suddenly opened into a vast, vivid landscape of dramatic tension, emotional stakes, and authentic atmosphere. Julian checked a stainless steel field watch on his olive strap and let out a soft sigh as he stood up from the table. Well, my hauler should be arriving at the North Depot in 20 minutes. Time for me to get back out into the rain and make sure our 100-year-old maps find a safe home. Miles stood up as well, extending his hand. Julian, I can't thank you enough. You completely saved this draft. You did the heavy lifting, Miles, Julian said, shaking his hand with a warm, steady grip. Just remember, keep the foundation honest and the walls will stand on their own. Don't let the weather stop you. I won't, Miles promised. Julian buttoned his charcoal trench coat, pulled his cap from beneath his arm, and walked toward the entrance with that same disciplined, unhurried stride. The brass bell above the glass door rang with a clear, cheerful chime as he stepped out onto 4th Avenue, his silhouette merging into the soft glow of the evening street lamps beneath the gentle Brooklyn drizzle. Miles sat back down at table 7. The cafe around him was quiet, filled with the comforting hum of the espresso machine, the gentle murmur of low conversations, and the warmth of the cast-iron radiator. He reached out and swept the 3 crumpled paper balls into his canvas bag, clearing the tabletop until only his yellow legal pad, his 12-inch ruler, and his drafting pencil remained. He placed the graphite lid against the top line of the 4th page, right beside the bold heading of Act 2. The artistic doubt, the sterile measurements, and the frantic paranoia were entirely gone. In their place was a story that had found its soul. With a steady hand and a clear mind, Miles began to write.